I'm Catherine Goshen, a professional astrologer from the village of Nyack in New York State, and I'm passionate about in-depth astrology and getting to the heart of the matter. In this video, we're going to talk about the upcoming eclipses for the whole of 2022. And before we launch into eclipse season, I'd like to invite you to check out the link for my study course below. I have 2 more places left. The year begins in September, and if you're interested, please fill out an application form. Now, eclipses. Everyone gets excited and almost nervous when eclipses are mentioned in astrology. And I thought I would make this video now before eclipse season gets underway and we get all these overblown predictions about eclipses. Eclipses are powerful, yet they do not affect everyone equally. And they are extremely useful in finding out what's going to take place on a global level. But this channel is very much about you and your chart and what's going on in your own life and how you can use astrology to help you understand things better and to know when to move forward, when to hold back. And it's operating on that level because that's where my interest lies, in human dynamics, how people use astrology in a positive way. The first eclipse that will take place in 2022 will be on April 30th, and that's going to be at 10 degrees of Taurus. Now, I want to spend just a few minutes explaining the structure of how the eclipse season works, because once you understand this, then you're going to get a fuller picture of the year and how the eclipses fall within the year. So we have 4 eclipses in 2022. The first one on April the 30th is a solar eclipse. It takes place at the new moon. Now, all of you know the new moon because you see it in the sky. It's a sliver. And you know that it takes approximately 14 days, sometimes 15, sometimes 16, but more or less 2 weeks for that moon to grow from new to full. So after that solar eclipse at the new moon, we're going to have a lunar eclipse 2 weeks later. And that lunar eclipse will be at 25 degrees of Scorpio on May 16th. Now, fast forward 6 months, we're going to have another series of eclipses, and it is in exactly the same format. So it begins with a new moon when the moon is beginning, and at that new moon, which will be on October 25th, there will be a solar eclipse at 2 degrees of Scorpio. And yes, 2 weeks later, we will have a lunar eclipse, which will take place at 15 degrees of Taurus. Now, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on that because it helps you to understand how these eclipses affect you personally. So think about this. At the end of April, the solar eclipse, followed by the lunar eclipse 2 weeks later. Those 2 eclipses will then be in effect the entire 6-month period until the new and the next solar eclipse takes place in October. And that will be in effect until we have the next eclipses, which will be in 2023. The first eclipse in 23 will also be in April. So it's important to understand that eclipses are not simply like an ordinary, let's say an ordinary full moon, where the week or 2 after that full moon, you reap the rewards, something comes to fruition of what has been taking place before that. The duration of the eclipses seems to last for up to 6 months or until that next eclipse takes place. So when you're looking at your charts, you have to know that it's not a dramatic one-off phenomenon. While you may have incidents or happenings or events related to that eclipse at the time, it can also be a series of events happening in those houses in your chart where the eclipses take place. Now think about this. The solar eclipse is in Taurus and the lunar eclipse is in Scorpio. And the same with the eclipses in October. In that case, the solar eclipse is in Scorpio and the lunar eclipse is in Taurus. So does that only affect people who are Taurus or Scorpio? No. If you have a sun in Taurus within 5 degrees on either side of that eclipse, in other words, a Taurus birthday around late April, early May, your sun will be affected by these eclipses. But it can also affect people who have Mercury, Moon, Venus, or Mars also in those degrees. Or your ascendant or your midheaven, your all-important angles of the chart. If they are within 5 degrees of an eclipse point, you will also be intensely affected by that eclipse. Now, what about the rest of us? What if there are some of us out there, we have no planets in Scorpio, no planets in Taurus, and no angles in Scorpio or Taurus? For those of us, it will mean that we have to check out our charts and see which house the eclipse is falling in. And then we have to look to the house opposite and see what's going on there, because the solar eclipse will take place in one house, and more often than not, the lunar eclipse is going to take place in the house exactly opposite that solar eclipse. So we have an axis going on, a polarity in our charts that is being highlighted for the next 6 months, and we need to pay attention to this. And this is how eclipses work. It's as if your life is up for review. And if you are leading a life path at the moment where you feel you are aligned with what you're meant to be doing, and that you have no unfinished business, and that you are on track, eclipses will usually have very little effect in your life. However, if your life is not on track, you're way off the path, you've been distracted from your main soul mission in life, and you've got a whole lot of loose ends flying around, and you've been engaging in behavior that is less than ethical, or you haven't been putting the work in that you should, the eclipse comes in, and the series of eclipses, and it's like an inspector coming to check out your house and saying, this is not in order, this is not in order, you have to clean up your act. And to find out where that will take place in your chart, you look to those 2 houses where the solar and the lunar eclipse will fall in. I'm going to give you those degrees again, and then I'll talk a little bit closer about the 12 houses and how the eclipses can manifest if they're falling in those areas of your chart. So once again, the April 30th eclipse is at 10 degrees of Taurus. So you take 5 degrees on either side of that, and you look for a planet or angle in your chart. The full moon lunar eclipse on May 16, 2022 is going to be at 25 degrees of Scorpio. So between 20 degrees of Scorpio and 29 degrees of Scorpio, do you have any planets in your chart in those degrees? Also in the opposite sign, which is Taurus. So do you have any planets between 20 and 29 degrees of Taurus? Because they will be opposed by the lunar eclipse of May 16. The October 25th eclipse is going to be a partial solar eclipse at 2 degrees of Scorpio. So I would say any planets within 0 to 7 degrees of Scorpio will be most affected, and also 0 to 7 degrees of Taurus. And then the final eclipse for this year is going to be November 8th, a total lunar eclipse at 15 degrees of Taurus. And you can look for planets between 10 and 20 degrees of either Taurus or Scorpio to see if you will have a direct contact from that eclipse, either by conjunction when two planets are close together, or by opposition when the new or the full moon will be opposing that planet in your chart. So now that we have all the dates in our head and we know the range which they take place, I'd like to mention one other thing before I talk about houses. Many of you are following astrology and you know what's going on at the moment. So you know that Uranus is currently transiting through Taurus. This is why so many Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, and Aquarius people have been going through radical changes, because Uranus is affecting them by conjunction, square, or opposition. And the first 2 eclipses that we have this year will be directly connected to Uranus, which is known as the Awakener. Uranus energy comes along and it's like a lightning bolt. We are asked to wake up, to often take on a new identity, to see ourselves for who we truly are, and to move forward with our lives. And sometimes there can be changes that are incredibly sudden because we are unprepared when the energy of Uranus comes in. It can be like receiving a download. How do we prepare for this? Almost impossible. But how do we deal with it when something comes in of this nature? We have to go with the flow. Uranus and the eclipses both ask for change. Mix things up, get moving, do something different. Maybe you're going to move home. Who knows what? Maybe you need to change college or take on a new job. Whatever the case, both eclipses are connected to that planet of change. And we need to honor that, and we need to all be open. The world is in a state of flux at the moment, and it is depending on us to receive what is given to us and to move forward into life. We need to let go of fear and of outdated beliefs, which are really not serving us at this time. The time is now for a new paradigm. All right, so let's now look at the houses. Let's say we have no planets in fixed signs, Taurus or Scorpio, and no angles, and our chart is not being activated directly by that eclipse. So what do we do then? For the first series of eclipses, we're going to see where does 10 degrees of Taurus and 25 degrees of Scorpio fall in our natal chart. So you know that the zodiac is 360 degrees, and you know that each house has a sign on the cusp. And you want to find in which house that set of degrees is falling in, because that is where the eclipse is going to take place in your chart. So if you're having the eclipse season in your 1st and your 7th house, in other words, you're going to have the solar eclipse in your 1st house and the lunar eclipse in your 7th house, or the other way around, you may be having the solar eclipse in your 7th house and the lunar eclipse in your 1st house, because they are a polarity in your chart. The first house is always opposite the 7th. The first house is me, and the 7th house is you. And this polarity, if you're having the eclipses in those 2 houses in your chart, it's going to highlight this theme of me and you, of us and them. Relationships. Are relationships in your life out of balance? How long have you been alone? Has it been too long? Is that out of balance? Or are you giving too much to somebody else? Is your relationship uneven? Any kind of events which are causing you to analyze your own identity and how much you give and put out to the other person, this is going to come into play during this eclipse season. And you're going to be asked to examine your own relationship, both with yourself and with others. Be open to what comes in. It's that inspector. He's coming in to show you things need to be cleaned up here. They need to get organized. What about if the eclipses are taking place in your 2nd and 8th house? Then you're going to be dealing with issues of what do you value and what do you own? What do you possess? Your property, your things of value. And how does that relate to what other people bring into your life? Inheritance, shared property, shared values. Are your values very different from the values of the people that you hang out with? And what do you need to do to clarify that? Or is there too much money coming from an outside source and not enough money coming from yourself that you earn? Are you dependent on the government? Are you dependent on someone else for your resources? These issues are going to be highlighted, and the first eclipse season will highlight them in that area that we spoke about, the 10 to 25 degrees of Taurus-Scorpio. The second eclipse season, October, November, is going to highlight them between 2 degrees of Scorpio, Taurus, and 15 degrees. So it's slightly earlier on. And you will be asked to clarify your values at this time and to look at the nuts and bolts of money. How are your finances? What needs to be cleaned up there? What needs to change about your practices of financial stability or financial management? Is there something that is going to come to light about the way you manage your resources that will need to be addressed? So let's talk about if the eclipse is going to fall in your 3-9 house polarity. Then there are going to be themes arising to do with the limitation of movement and the freedom of movement, or the limitation of ideas and communication and the freedom of ideas and communication. Can I say what I wish? Can I travel? Am I allowed to be expanded and to be myself? Or do I need to, what is being limited in the way I communicate, the way I understand things? Is information being withheld from me? This axis is very much to do with how we communicate and how we move around. And if this house is in need of a cleanup, and you have the eclipses falling in that 3-9 axis, there may be issues with transportation. There may be issues with travel plans. There may be issues with sharing of information and being heard. Ideas of freedom, philosophy, I have the right to this. These are very big themes which could arise at that time, and they need to be worked through, and that's why they arise. So pay attention to those areas of your life if you have the 2022 eclipses falling in those 2 houses. If the eclipses are falling in houses 4 and 10, There's often a tension that arises between home and work. Also between one's need for security and this idea of putting oneself out there in the public eye. You know, what comes to light? What do you have to give up when you are very much in that 10th house? So home, it could be people in the home, it could be moving home, it could be adjustments in the home and in your own sense of personal security as compared to movement at work. What's going on at work? Am I taking this new job? Am I staying put? Am I appreciated at work? How do I put myself out there into the public eye? So pay attention to little pings that are happening even now in March, and you may be working on that theme for the rest of the year. What if the eclipse falls in houses 5 and 11? Giving love and receiving love. This house polarity is very much to do with how we give and receive pleasure, leisure, enjoyment time, relaxation time, being with friends, hanging out, all these dreams, our hopes, our goals. It's a beautiful axis which houses all those things. And when an eclipse highlights that axis, it's asking you to look at those areas of your life. Are you overindulging? Is there too much pleasure going on? Have you lost your sense of why you're here and what gives you pleasure? Or are you the opposite? Are you pushing it away? Are you sheltering yourself from going out into the world and enjoying yourself because of fears and phobias? So the eclipse in that polarity is going to call you to confront those issues. You may find your hopes and dreams are being dashed at this time, or they're being elevated. And you will have to find your way, because the choices that you make during the first eclipse season are going to be re-evaluated in the second eclipse season. And the 5-11 polarity is also very much to do with creativity. Are you expressing your creativity to the full? Also to do with children. What is the balance in your life between how much you give to yourself, how much you give to your children? And finally, what is that elusive quality that you need when you want someone to love you back, but they can only do that if you totally love them first? So it's about finding that balance of being able to give and receive love without a hidden agenda. And the final polarity that the eclipses could take place in would be houses 6 and 12. And this could highlight areas such as this idea that we are always in some way servants. Everyone is a servant to something. What do we serve? And does the way we serve affect our health? The parallel to that is the 12th house, which the Vedic scriptures call the house of spiritual liberation. What is hidden from us at this time that needs to come to light? Have we been serving the wrong thing, and by so doing, damaging our bodies? The 6-12th house polarity runs very deep, and we often need to be sorely tested before we will acknowledge and let things come out of that 12th house into the light. And eclipses can be so helpful in that process, because they can bring us to a deeper spiritual understanding of our path and why we are here. So I think that's definitely enough information for one day. I've covered a lot, and there is a lot that may come to you on a second listen. Finally, and most importantly, I'd like to suggest that the week before the solar and the lunar eclipse, that you refrain from making important life-changing decisions, getting married, moving house, and so on. The ancients suggest that the period before the eclipse is a time where one should be quiet, and that after the eclipse season is over, more information will come to light, and you'll realize what your best path is, and you can move forward with grace. So we know it would be a week before April 30th, and then you would have that entire 3-week period until after the lunar eclipse. And the second eclipse season it would be a week before October 25th. And then you would have that entire period until after the full moon on November 8th, where you're asked to simply rest with whatever decision is activating your life at this time, and to pause and take it up after the eclipse season is over. So thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I appreciate it. It helps me to grow my channel. And I wish you a wonderful 2022. Until next time.